Man, oh man, everywhere you turn, Bitcoin this, Bitcoin that. Even our little corner of the universe, and all the web design and development blogs that I pay attention to, they're all talking about Bitcoin. So fine, we will talk about it in this episode. Is it worth paying attention to? The massive industry has the potential to disrupt, and a little bit of a history lesson that you might not know. All coming up in this episode. There's a lot of developers who have a lot of opinions about what you need to do this coding thing for a living and be good at it. But I often find that their opinions tend to be better for them than they are for you. And that's part of the reason why I created this podcast. To cut through the crap and give it to you straight. Now, you won't always like me, you won't always agree with me, but I will tell you the truth. I'm John Morris, and welcome to The John Morris Show. Now let's quit the yakking and get to it. Hey there, John Morris here, JohnMorrisOnline.com. Welcome back to another episode of The John Morris Show. This one we're going to get into Bitcoin a little bit. It seems like everywhere I look, everybody's talking about Bitcoin. It's even all over all of our web designer and developer sites. And my little brother's been pestering me about it. It's all over the news. And it's kind of a techie-ish topic. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit today. And should you invest in it, and then tell you what I know about it. But more than that, I'm actually looking for, this is going to be one of those episodes, I'm calling these my Educate Me episodes. So it's more of an episode where I'm looking for those of you out there who maybe know a lot about this to educate me. And then maybe at some future point I can turn around and again share everything that I've learned from that. So I'm really looking for you to also interact with this and kind of teach me a little bit about what you know. But I'm going to share what I know, what I think on the whole thing, and kind of get into this whole topic of Bitcoin because it's really big right now. Now, before I do that, I just want to let you know I've just created a whole brand new standalone site for the show. You can go to johnmorrisshow.com. All the episodes are there. All the subscribe links for iTunes, Android, RSS, all of that stuff is over there. And then I'm also, because I really want to try and I'm really focused on growing this show, I'm willing to give you Module 1 of my PHP 101 course if you're willing to go on iTunes and leave me just an honest review. I'm not even saying go over there and you have to leave me a certain kind of review. Just go over there and leave me an honest rating and review of the show, and then let me know, and I'll send you Module 1 of my PHP 101 course. So all of that, all the instructions for that, again, are at johnmorrisshow.com. Just click the Start Here link, and that'll kind of walk you through everything you need to do in order to get Module 1 of PHP 101. And then, like I said, all the past episodes are now archived there for you to go through and listen to any past episodes. So check that out. All right. So with that said, let's kind of get into this a little bit. So first off, let me just talk about this idea of, is Bitcoin worth it? Should you even care about Bitcoin? Is this something that we should even pay attention to? Because, I mean, honestly, for a while, that's a question that I kind of went back and forth on, right? I really wasn't sure if Bitcoin was going to be something that was really going to make any sort of dent and so forth. But there's been there's things that have happened really quite recently, but even before that have been happening that I've kind of taken notice of. And so it's something that I'm paying attention to a little bit more. But generally speaking, and I've talked about this before in the past, I think knowing what trends are coming and getting ahead of those sort of trends is really, really important. In fact, there's a lot of wealth that's been created by people throughout the years by simply being ahead of trends, by seeing something coming and then putting themselves in a position to take advantage of that, to benefit from that when it does actually hit, right? So I think Apple is probably the classic example. So when Napster, it was actually Napster that first disrupted the music industry when they came out with their little peer-to-peer thing. And, they kind of flamed out, and they were doing, it was kind of, they got in legal trouble and all that. But, Apple and Steve Jobs at the time took sort of notice of that. And, probably not inside Steve Jobs' head, but probably saw the disruption that happened in the music industry coming, saw that Napster is like the canary in the coal mine. And so they ended up creating the iPod. And I remember there's a kind of iconic, there's an iconic, the Apple developers conference, whatever it is. It's escaping me right now. But whatever, it was where they would always release the new products, when they're coming out with the new iPhones and stuff. That's where they announce all that stuff. And there's kind of an iconic one where he says, we're no longer a computer company, we're a mobile device company. And that was really the one of the big shifts that they initially took, right? They went from really focusing on making MacBooks and laptops and computers and so forth to realizing that this mobile revolution was coming. And it started initially with the iPad and seeing what was happening in the music industry. And eventually they created iTunes. And not only did they profit from that, but not only did they see it come and exploit it and profit from it, they also, in turn, kind of helped to create it. They kind of helped to solidify the disruption that Napster had initially made. And there were record stores across the Tower Records, I think is the classic example, that were these big, huge, money-making stores that just got completely wiped out by this. We saw a similar thing in video, right? Where it maybe wasn't quite as devastating as music because it had happened before, and there were certain people that saw it coming. But the classic example here is Blockbuster. Blockbuster essentially got wiped out. There was a Blockbuster on every corner. That was kind of the myth back in the day, and then Netflix came out, and then you have Google Play, and then the Apple iTunes with the video and all that sort of stuff, and the store. I don't know where do you buy movies on Apple? I don't even know. I haven't used one so long. But anyway, Apple TV, whatever. All that stuff came out, and Blockbuster doesn't even exist anymore. It ran out of business. So again, seeing these trends coming allowed people to position themselves to profit with them, to adapt, to adjust. And not adapting and adjusting has put plenty of companies out of business. And so the thing that I always think about is the people that did see this coming. For example, Apple seeing what was going on in the music industry and creating the iPod and then iTunes. How many billions did they make as a result of that? Apple was in a place, I think it was in the early to mid 80s, where they were really in trouble. When Jobs left, they really kind of got in trouble. And then they purchased, was it Next or Pixar or whatever? They purchased the other company that Jobs had created. And he came back into the company and eventually became CEO again and so forth, and sort of made all these changes. But they were in a bad spot. And so this kind of revitalized the company. And so the company may not even have existed if it weren't for them seeing this coming and making these changes. So again, how many billions have they made as a result since then of just frankly still being a company, but B, also how they've adapted and kind of been a leader in certain industries. So that's one of the things that I think about. More than that, how many people's lives, if you're someone who cares about impact, right? You want to make a difference. You want to do something that matters. You want to have a legacy, right? How many years from now will we still be talking about Steve Jobs and Apple and that whole sort of thing, right? So how many people's lives have been made dramatically better as a result of it. So again, all of this to say, I believe spotting trends like this is really, really important. And again, it's one of those things that when you can see something coming and can position yourself properly, you have the opportunity to really, really benefit from it. And so, should we be talking about Bitcoin? Should we care about Bitcoin? At the very least, we should be talking about it. And I do believe that it's something that we should care about, because when we talk about industries that are getting disrupted, we've seen it happen in the music industry. We've kind of seen it happen in the video industry a little bit. I believe it's happening in education right now. I believe quietly education is getting completely disrupted. And not a ton of people are really talking about it, but I think it's happening in the education industry. And Bitcoin represents one of the very, very few disruptions that has ever happened in the monetary system, or in terms of currency. And when you talk about disruption in currency, you're talking in you're playing in big boys territory, and I mean the biggest of the big boys territory. So, Bitcoin, I don't know, it may or may not become the new currency, but any disruption in this particular industry, in this particular segment, is very important to pay attention to. Because if it does, it's going to completely change everything. It's going to completely change the way people think about all this sort of thing. So, again, there's a couple of things about Bitcoin that make it in particular prime or capable of causing disruption in a segment of our society that really doesn't necessarily see a lot of change. There's a lot of disruption, but it's of a different kind. And so I want to talk about what I know about Bitcoin and why I'm paying attention to it, why I think you should pay attention to it. Now, that doesn't mean I know everything about Bitcoin. I certainly don't. And I can't tell you, oh, you should invest here, or you should invest there. I would never do that anyway. But again, something to pay attention to and why. So, I'm not some crypto fanboy, but it's kind of hard to overstate how big of a deal this is, because we're talking about the very medium upon which all exchange in the world happens, right? Everybody may have different money. Different countries have different money. They call it different things, different denominations, all that sort of stuff. But it's all still ultimately currency. And the total money in the world is estimated, depends kind of how you define money, but anywhere from 80 trillion to 1.2 quadrillion. And all of this money is generally controlled by central banks, which is ultimately controlled by governments and politicians. And that has some implications. That's one of the reasons why it's one of the most tightly controlled in terms of really trying to insulate itself from outside influence and outside disruption. And that's why, and they pass, governments pass laws that make it illegal to use any other form of tender and currency and so forth. Like, they really do a lot of work to insulate the monetary system from any sort of outside disruption. There's probably good logical reasons for that, and there's probably also some nefarious ones there as well. But one of the really big, the point here is that it's ultimately controlled in any particular country by a central bank. So it's really only a handful of people that are controlling the monetary system, making monetary policy, and managing that whole part of it. And so it can be a little bit easier to manipulate via, maybe corruption in politics or public opinion, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little bit more easy to manipulate in that sense because there's so few people that are actually controlling it, and it's so well insulated from the outside influences. And so one of the benefits of Bitcoin. No, people talk about it being irreversible, which helps with things like chargebacks, which is a real problem. The low transaction fees, the anonymity, all of that stuff is there. But one of the big ones that I look at, and again, why I'm paying attention to it, is decentralization. So governments manipulate currencies. You don't have to be a government-hating libertarian like me to recognize that. They do it all the time. You're here in the United States, we've had interest rates. Our Federal Reserve have held interest rates artificially low for a decade or more than that. And, that you may not, well, what does that have to do with anything? What, there's reasons why, etc. Regardless of whether you agree or disagree with it, everybody knows that the interest rates have been held artificially low. And that's to spur on this idea of lending. When interest rates are low, more people are more likely to take on loans, home loans, business loans, car loans, those sort of things, because the interest rate is low. And so it creates this economy of borrowing. People are borrowing more and more. When the interest rates go up, people don't want to borrow as much, because if you got to pay a 10% interest rate, well, you're going to be paying a lot more. And so holding those interest rates low, whether you think it's a good thing or you think it's a bad thing, it is manipulating the currency. It's manipulating the monetary system, and ultimately manipulating the economy. It has certain effects. Some of those might be considered good. Some of those might be considered bad. Okay. But it is a manipulation. You don't have to, again, hate government to see that. But this kind of thing is not new, right? Way back in the Roman Empire, this kind of thing happened. So, as an example, for the first 220 years of the Roman Empire, the most common coin that was used during that time was the denarius, and it had 4.5 grams of pure silver. And just to give you some context around this, the Roman Empire that's considered to have existed to have been the Roman Empire from 27 BC to 395 AD. So a little over 400 years. And Caesar, for example, was not actually a part of the Roman Empire. He was more of a precursor to it. He was assassinated in 44 BC. It was actually his son or nephew, I can't remember exactly, that ultimately in the turmoil when Caesar was assassinated, was able to grab power, and that is what marks the beginning of the Roman Empire. Okay, so just to give you some context, in the first 220 years roughly, of the Roman Empire, that's the coin that was used. Well, by 161 AD, so roughly 120 years into it, the denarius had gone from pure silver to about 75% silver. This was around the time of Marcus Aurelius. And then by the time of Gallienus, who was emperor from 253 AD to 268 AD, the denarius was only 5% silver. Now, why did they do that? Well, because in order to finance, let's say that you wanted to go to war with a certain country or a certain element out there, you want to invade some place, you needed to pay the soldiers to do that. You needed to pay the people to make the chariots and all that sort of thing. You had to spend a lot of money to do that. Well, when you don't have dollar bills that you can just print at a printing press, right? Instead, you have actual silver coins that you have to mine silver to get. Well, you only have so much silver that you can mine. And so essentially, in order to get the money to do that, you would have to convince the populace, right, that has its money, that it's worth doing for them to give up all their money to you in order to finance this war for you to go out and do that. Well, that becomes more and more difficult over time. And so what they would do is, instead of doing that, they would start to debase their currency. They would, instead of making it 100% silver, they would add, 25% copper to it and still say that it was the same denomination. If you look at coins in the U.S. now, it's very, very similar. The coins are not, you have a nickel that's says it's worth 5 cents, and it's supposed to be initially when they were made, they were supposed to be 5 cents worth of actual silver, whatever the rate for that was. Now they're barely any silver at all, if any. I don't even know if there's any silver in a nickel now, or a dime, or a quarter, or whatever. They're mostly copper and some other sorts of metals. And so by having to use less silver to create an individual coin, yet still saying it has the same denomination, you could create more coins, and then you could pay for all the stuff that you wanted to do. Okay, so that was why they would do that. And it happens all the time. It's happened here in the United States. So in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, at that time, gold was fixed at a price of $20.67 per ounce. So that was the price that the government basically said, if you have $20.67, you can go to the Federal Reserve and we will give you 1 ounce of gold. That was literally, dollars were basically an exchange note for actual gold. You could go to the Federal Reserve and get actual gold, or one of the subsidiary banks, so forth. And you needed $20.67 per ounce of gold that you wanted. Then in 1934, there was a lot of things that happened in here, and actually in 33, FDR confiscated, that some people don't like that term, but basically it was a buyback program for gold. Told all people they had to turn in their gold, and they were going to give them, you were going to get $20.67 per ounce for that gold. So everybody in the United States was told they had to turn in all of their gold. They were going to get $20.67 per ounce of that gold. So that happened. But in 33, it was still $20.67. Then in 34, after that buyback, the Gold Reserve Act of 1984 raised the price to $35 per ounce. So in that, like the stroke of a pen, the value of the dollar was instantly made about like 40% less valuable than it was the day before the act. So now you need, instead of needing $20 to get an ounce of gold, you needed $35. Well, that instantly makes the dollar less valuable. So they quite directly debased the value of the dollar. So again, all of this to bring up this point that this is what currency is right now. It's federal government acts, it's politicians, it's emperors debasing the currency by manipulating how much silver is. This is what currency has been since the beginning of time. It's been controlled by the biggest, baddest bully on the block, essentially the emperor in Rome, or the president of a particular country. This is how currency has been handled. And so what Bitcoin represents is a sort of democratization of the currency system. One of the big things that I pay attention to with Bitcoin is its decentralization. Because with Bitcoin, there's no single party that controls the currency. There's no single individual or even small group of people that can 100% control it. Now, you're seeing with the forks and stuff that are happening now that there can be arguments and there can be disagreements, and there can be people that say we're going to go this way and I'm going to go this way, but it's all based around choice. In the United States in 1933, when the federal government said turn in your gold and we'll give you money, you didn't have a choice. If you didn't turn it in, you were going to go to jail, right? And when they raised the price from $20 to $35 per ounce, you didn't have a choice. There was nothing you could do about that other than try to elect people 4 years later that would go back and change it, who had no incentive to. With Bitcoin, it's completely democratized. It's completely decentralized. And the more people that are on the network, really the more decentralized and less it's able to be manipulated by a single entity. Now, that's all in theory. Again, I don't know all the ins and outs of Bitcoin exactly, but that's the general idea behind it. So what I'm trying to point out to you here is just the scope of how much of the industry we're talking about here, right? We're talking about 80 trillion, anywhere from 80 trillion to 1.2 quadrillion. We're talking about all of the money in the world. And then we're talking about an industry that historically has been completely insulated, controlled by very small groups of people, and has been able to be manipulated by those small groups of people, most often to their own benefit and to the detriment of the people that are actually having to use the currency on a day-to-day basis. Imagine if you were alive in 1934 when the dollar was debased, and you were making, at that time, let's say you were making $1,000 a week, and suddenly that $1,000 now only became like it was about $600 in terms of what it could buy you. It was debased by about 40%. How hard would that have hurt, right? I mean, you could have went from being just fine, making it, to all of a sudden now you're struggling. You can't pay bills, because businesses can raise prices quickly. But were all those businesses going to go around and instantly give all their employees a 40% raise in relation to what happened with the price of gold? Probably not. And so, again, it just it's a small group. It's historically been a small group of people that control this sort of stuff. And so, what I'm getting at is that when we talk about disruption, when it comes to currency, we are talking about the kind of disruption, both the scale and then how it's been historically managed and taken care of. We're talking about a disruption that is kind of world altering in a lot of ways. Now, I know that sounds kind of hypey and so forth, and I don't know if that's what Bitcoin is going to do, but that's the potential that's there. Now, imagine if Apple can make billions by seeing a trend coming in the music industry, which is one very small part of this whole pie. If they can make billions as a result of seeing that coming, what's possible by seeing what's coming with Bitcoin and a disruption of our entire monetary system, and digging into that and understanding what's going to happen, what's going on here, what might happen here, etc., and positioning yourself there. Now, I have no idea what the answer is in terms of how you should position yourself. I don't know that. I don't know enough about it, but I am reading more into it, and that's why I'm kind of looking to some of you out there that are the Bitcoin experts, and this is very much an educate me type episode, because I want to hear from you. I want to know more about this sort of stuff. But I very much am aware of what the actual potential here is. So imagine what kind of benefit you could get by digging in this and understanding this. So overall, that's my answer to the question of, is Bitcoin worth it? Is it worth paying attention to? Is it worth looking into? If it's not obvious by now, I think it's 1,000% worth looking into, because of just the kind of potential disruption it could be. And ultimately, I think if it does work out, while it's still, those hardcore libertarianish people like me would say, it's still ultimately a kind of fiat currency, in the sense that it's not something real and physical. And I'm sure there's Bitcoin people out there who would even argue with me on that. It certainly is better than the way things are handled right now. And I don't think there's any question about that. That if you're going to have a kind of fiat currency, it's better one that's decentralized, democratized, the way Bitcoin is, rather than a small group of people being able to just print whatever money they want to go off and run whatever war or institute whatever program they want to do that on. Again, I think it's very much worth looking into. All right, so that's all I'm going to really get into today. Again, I'm not a Bitcoin expert. I don't want to try and pretend like I am. Very much looking for your feedback on this, what you know about Bitcoin, that sort of thing. The things that maybe I haven't mentioned, or maybe I even got wrong in this particular episode. I'd love to hear about all of that. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, a whole brand new site for the podcast, JohnMorrisShow.com. Be sure to head over there. If you like the episode, be sure to subscribe. You can do that over there. If you like a free copy of Module 1 of my PHP 101 course, just click the Start Here button at johnmorrisshow.com, and I'll walk you through the instructions on how to do that. I'd love if you, even if you don't want that, if you'd leave me a review over on iTunes, johnmorrisonline.com/iTunes. All right, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.